Hello, everybody. How are you going? So, my name is Sergey, and today I'm going to facilitate this webinar. And so I think we can wait for 2-3 minutes. Yeah, just a second. I will make. Yeah. So done. Hi, Alan.
Hello.
So everybody who is here, now we have 25 people, 25 participants. I think more people will join us during 5-10 minutes. So everybody who is here, do you hear us well? Everything good? So let's check from which countries are you? You can write your country, your city, your street, your number of debit card, your number of your phone, so everything. Ukraine, Dnipro, Odessa, Ukraine. Cool. Ukraine. Yeah, most part of participants from Ukraine. I posted on LinkedIn as well, but I don't know. So I think we can start, and we will start from what we will start, Alan. So let me introduce Alan Page. He has been a software tester, as I remember, 25 years, right?
Sounds about right, yeah.
Yeah, cool. So, and Alan is the Director of Quality of Service in Unity Technologies, and I think he have a lot of things to tell us today about testing. So, Alan, please, your word from now. I just, yeah.
Did you have some questions you're going to ask me first?
Ready to go? Yes, sorry, it's my fault. I'm nervous a little bit. Yeah, so guys, I will ask Alan some questions, and they are like short questions, short answer. So
this is to get all of us warmed up.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Alan, what does testing mean for you in one sentence?
Testing is an activity that accelerates the delivery of shippable quality.
Okay, that's very good. I like it. Yeah.
And one you probably haven't heard much before. Let's listen to my podcast.
Yeah, I know this, and sometimes I tell in these words to my clients, like, "Hey guys, what do you do?" I do this. So it's very good, short and well understandable. So, and what about your first QA job? What was it? First bug. Do you remember it?
I do. I'm old, but not that old. I got a job out of graduate school. I was a music major in college, and I found a job at a company called MIDIsoft that made music software. And I was hired to do tech support, but on my first day, they also told me I was a network administrator. And later that day, they told me I was also their software tester. So if anyone else listening was buying computers back in the days when they had sound cards that were separate, and the sound card came with some extra software that you could run, it was probably some of the things that my company worked on.
Cool.
So I worked there for about 1.5 years.
Okay. So, and what kind of, it's kind of interesting question, what kind of fuck ups did you have in testing, like the biggest one?
So I think the canonical answer when you ask a tester this is maybe to talk about a bug that they missed. But I think quality is owned by the team, and I would not feel that would be my personal fuck up. But it is, my biggest fuck up is about a bug that affected a lot of our customers. I worked on embedded Windows 15 years ago. But it isn't that I missed the bug or our team missed the bug. It's that the reason it was missed is because we did my team and I did a not very good job communicating our testing strategy to the team,
Hmm.
to the overall team. When we talked about it afterwards in a retrospective, we figured out it was purely a communication issue. So my biggest fuck up was not being as transparent as possible in how I was doing my testing and what our team were doing.
Hmm.
So since then, I've tried to be better about being ultra transparent and over communicating all the things I'm working on and the things my team are working on, just so it's clear what we're doing and not doing, and to start discussions about gaps where needed.
Hmm. Okay. So, and about your work in Microsoft, I think for everybody it will be interesting just to know how is it to work, in Microsoft?
Well, I was there for a little while, about 22 years. I watched it grow from about 15,000 people when I was there to about 180,000 when I left. But the great thing is I know a lot of people in the industry today change jobs about every 18 months to 2 years just to get more challenges, to get more growth. The great thing about Microsoft was I could do that there with never leaving the company. So I
Mhm.
moved jobs a lot. I got a chance to try a lot of different things. One of the things that, can I say I missed this? One of the things that one could miss from Microsoft is just that network of people to ask questions to and to
Yeah.
develop ideas with. Uh, Definitely Unity is big enough where I have that, so I don't miss that. But at a smaller company, it can be difficult to find people to vet your ideas with. So communities like this are another good way of doing that when you're outside of a medium or large company. But
Hmm.
it was a lot of fun. I did everything I wanted to there, and I ran out of things I wanted to do, so I decided to do something else, and that's how I ended up at Unity.
Okay, cool. By the way, you mentioned about challenges. What kind of, what the biggest challenge you had in testing?
My biggest challenge today is probably the biggest challenge that it's been throughout my career. It's just the scope of that challenge has grown. And I think, and I'll describe what I mean by that. If I go back to my mission or testing is to accelerate the delivery of shippable quality, uh, in order to do that, I have to see the system and systems within systems. It requires a lot of deep systems thinking, or at least reflection to figure out what is it we're building, how are we building it, what are we doing to it, zooming out, figuring out where the bottlenecks are, what are
Hmm.
the issues in that, what are the ones that, what's the low hanging fruit, where should we concentrate our efforts in order to uh, learn more about the product and to speed and to become more efficient in how we build it, dive in, take care of that problem either through as a manager, through delegation, or I still dive in myself sometimes, and then know when to dive back out and look at the whole system again. So one of the things I look for a lot in testers is this ability to dive in and dive out. Talk about the
Hmm.
10,000 foot view and the 10-inch view, and that's always been a challenge. And the way I grow my own knowledge in my career is I the scope of what I'm zooming out at is much bigger. Uh, and then when I dive in, it's a lot farther to go. So
Hmm.
that's the challenge I have today, but it's probably the same challenges I had 20 years ago, just on a much smaller scale.
Okay, it's like long way of challenges.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Okay.
one of the things, just to add on to that, one of the things I love about testing or knowledge work in general is uh, you get to a stage like at first you don't know anything, and then you think you know everything, and then very quickly you realize that you don't know anything again. And it's all about just trying to keep your head above water and trying to keep learning and keep
Yeah.
discovering what you don't know you don't know.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. Okay. I think I'm out of questions.
All right,
So, and
I
now
guess we're done.
it's your turn.
Oh, I have a presentation. Let me see if I can get this shared.
Yeah.
You can let me know if all is well.
Yep. Now it's perfect.
All right, I'm going to see if this works with my
Everybody.
speaker notes on this monitor, but let me know if anything, just yell in if anything doesn't look right. But
Yeah.
otherwise, I'll go along here and I'll leave plenty of time for questions at the end. And of course, you can put the questions into the question window in Zoom. Right?
Yeah. Everybody
Okay.
know how to use it. So
They'll figure it out. They're testers. They're smart. They'll figure this stuff
yes.
out. So I wanted to talk for the next little while here about my adventures in modern testing. And in order to do that, we'll have to talk a little bit about what modern testing is and how it came about. But this is something I've been thinking about a lot on a podcast I have with a friend of mine from Microsoft. He's still at Microsoft, a data scientist named Brent Jensen. And this is something that developed a couple years ago and has this concept of modern testing. And I'm feeling better and better about it. It covers a lot of how my teams and even some teams I don't have direct influence over are functioning at Unity. But I just want to kind of go over that and my experiences and how that's grown. And that's grown into this talk that today is called More Adventures in Modern Testing. So the first question to answer is, what the heck is modern testing? And I can't see any hands raised. You don't have to do it in the app, but maybe some of you have heard of modern testing or seen the modern testing principles that we'll go through today. But if you know anything about it, or even if you don't, I'll preface the talk by saying that modern testing is not really that much about testing, and it's not really that modern. And that's for a reason. The term came about in sort of a backward way and then has grown into this thing which now has this name. And the one sentence name I use for this is, it's the antidote for traditional testing methods. And by traditional methods, I'm talking about the things that I used. There's actually still in use a lot, too much in my opinion, and definitely were the way we made software 20 years ago. The problem is, and I'll dive into this in a deeper rant in a few minutes, is that the way we make software today and the customers of our software today are not the same as they were 20 years ago or 10 years ago. And I believe that the way we make software needs to change. So let me talk a little bit about what I mean by traditional testing, and we'll go on. So traditional test teams is, you can think of a waterfall model or definitely a separate and siloed test team. And this is the way, I was the only tester at Midisoft, but when I joined Microsoft, I worked on testing networking on Windows 95. Very, very large team. I don't remember how many people were on the team, but it was several hundred. There were maybe 30 or 40 of us just working on networking. With a chunk of us, almost half. For a long time, Microsoft had almost a 1-to-1 developer to tester ratio. We had a separate test team. Developers would work on code. They'd give it to us. We would find bugs. We'd give the code back to developer, or the bugs to the developers. They'd fix the bugs. We'd verify the bugs. We'd figure out they didn't fix the bugs. We'd give them back to the developers, who would then refix them and try and fix them better. And it wasn't a very efficient process. Even at that time, however, developers often, for the really tricky bugs, did come to my office, or I went to their office and we sat down and worked on things together. But that was more of a rarity. There was a lot of back and forth. And I know a lot of teams, even today, but especially in the 90s, testing would be outsourced entirely. A development team would work on something, build it, and then when they were some amount of time away from shipping, a week, 2 week, a month, they'd give the whole product to an offshore test team, who would then test it and give them reports, and they'd figure out which ones they wanted to fix. Then they'd ship their thing. That model was the right model in the 1990s. And it could, and to be fair, it can be the right model even beyond then a little bit. But when you think back, I don't know if anyone is as old as I am on this call. I don't feel old, but I do know that when I worked on Windows 95 and it shipped, there were people lining up at midnight to buy it so they could get it on the release day and go home and install it from the 15 floppy disks it came on. The number of people, the percentage of the population using software was relatively small, especially compared to today. Today, we have billions of people using software every day. It's difficult to imagine a world where software isn't part of what you're doing every day. And that's even if I take your phones away. Software controls traffic lights, it controls trains, software is everywhere. So it's the customers of the software have changed. And then also one last thing, if you think about phones are a great example and all the apps available on your phones, unless you use a Windows phone, then you don't have very many apps. But for the rest of you, uh, if you want an app to do something, you install an app and you try it. And if you don't like it in the first 10 minutes, you uninstall it and try a different one. That's consumers are much more fickle than they used to be. Used to be you had two choices, you made a choice, you paid a few $100s for it, and that's what you used. So things have changed. The software has changed, the processes have changed, the customers have changed. A lot has changed. So what happened not that long ago, relatively, is agile. And then out of that came agile testing, which is most, I guess I can use the definitions mostly as described by Lisa Crispin and Janet Gregory when they wrote the agile testing book, which I have on my shelf over there if you have the camera on, as well as their more agile testing, where they talked about a lot about whole team quality and the team owning quality, uh, and as the testers being the test specialist on a feature team, which is good. It got the team working together a lot more. What I've seen in practice, and I've talked to Lisa about this, is although it was entirely their intent that the whole team's owns quality and everyone takes part in testing tasks, what I had seen in practice on agile teams, and I'm going to guess a bunch of you or most of you are doing some sort of flavor of agile, is that the test specialist on the team does all of the testing tasks. Maybe not the unit tests, but maybe everything else. And they can be a bottleneck. And if you go back to my mission that I described earlier, accelerate the achievement of shippable quality, being a bottleneck is the opposite of that. We want to eliminate bottlenecks. So if the tester is responsible for the testing, and again, this is an abuse of agile where you may have a 2-week sprint. Say you're doing Scrum, you have a 2-week sprint, and the tester ends up working 14-hour days the last 2 days to do all the testing. That again, that's an abuse of what Lisa Crispin and Janet Gregory want described in agile testing and wanted it to be, but in practice that happened a lot. So Brent and I, this is really, modern testing is an evolution of agile testing. Still the test specialist on a feature team. A lot more emphasis on data, and this is something that's probably one of the bigger differences, as well as this idea about efficiency and about accelerating the team, looking for ways to improve. Modern testers, if you could describe a modern tester as a person, would often lead the team towards better practices and try and find new ways or better ways for the teams to do things. And some examples, in case I forget to get to them later, is people on my teams spend, well, actually not that much time. They do a lot of test coaching. They do a lot of work in our continuous integration gates, our check-in gates, to make sure that to improve code correctness. And of course, they're dwelling in data a lot. And I'll dive into a lot of those things when I get to the principles momentarily. But that's sort of modern testing. But as promised, and I'm going to dive way deeper into modern testing, but as promised, I want to talk about what I don't like about traditional testing. Given that the business today is different and who we're delivering to for most companies, I don't know who I'm talking to, but for most of us delivering mobile apps and web services, and even shrink wrap products. Like I have followed a lot of these things without knowing what they were when I worked on Xbox One, which was a big, fat, heavy download. But the more I've thought about the old way of testing, what I call traditional testing, air quotes, I believe it actually harms the business. I think traditional testing creates unnecessary delays and costs if the test team is the gatekeeper of quality. They want to stop things from shipping because they're not good enough. That is the opposite of accelerating the business. I'm not saying the test team should say, hurry up and get it out there, but they should help figure out the best way to get it out there quickly to provide value to customers. Lean Startup is one of my favorite books on software engineering. It is definitely the companion guide and was a lot of inspiration for modern testing. But Eric Ries in that book says, you don't get value from your engineering efforts until it's in the hands of customers. So we have to get it out there, get that feedback. But of course, you want a way to get feedback, and of course, you want to make sure you're not harming the business and harming the customer by delivering things that are going to lose data, it's corrupt things, lose money, etc. I think a lot of traditional testing, when I reflect, a lot was focused on code and spec correctness. When you think of that waterfall, we do a lot of, at the top, you're refining the requirements, then you're refining the code. And then finally, when you get almost to shipping, you're looking at how it actually behaves for customers and looking at some of the illities like performance, reliability, security, at a time when it's often too late to fix those things. I think the earlier we can focus on end to end, the better off we're going to be. I want to dive a little bit back in that first point I made about delays and costs. I think what I saw a lot in my old test teams was a safety net culture where it was okay for developers to create code that had bugs because we would find them for them. And to be worse, I think I saw what I would describe as a codependency between developers and testers, where a developer would say, here's my code, please find the bugs. And as a tester, I'd say, I found the bugs, so my job is validated. And he goes, and I get, thank you for finding my bugs for me. I'll fix them now. And one, we have the back and forth, but two, it's just a weird relationship that could be optimized. I want to get rid of the safety net, but I don't want developers to fail either. So this is where the coaching comes in. So what I'm doing is, instead of giving them, if you think of a tightrope and a safety net below, maybe what I'm giving them is, instead of a safety net, I'm lowering the rope. So if they fall, it's bad, but they won't get hurt. They won't die. They'll just get hurt a little bit and they can learn from that. Also, I think we still have a little bit of this. This is going away recently. A lot of times, you know, I've spent 25 years in test positions. Most of it, I spent my last 5 years at Microsoft as just an engineering manager, running multidiscipline teams. But for the most part, and I spent about a year as a software developer, but the rest of the time in test. I was one of Microsoft's first test architects, which meant I had a fancy title mostly, but it was supposed to mean that I had some idea of what, of a breadth of knowledge in testing and was a specialist or some sort of expert in testing. But somewhere in there, many of us, myself included, began to believe that test was some innate specialization that only required, that could not be, it required a special mindset and gene pool to get. And what I've realized in maybe the last 7 years or so, my last 5 years at Microsoft and 2 years here, is that developers actually, people that have been developers their career or even just starting as a developer, can actually learn to be a very good tester. The very best testers are still going to be better than developers learning to test, but 90+% of the testing skills and the secret knowledge we have around how to test software can be taught, and taught fairly easily. On one of my teams at Microsoft, I'm not a big fan of bug bashes because I'd rather build the quality in at the beginning, but I used it as an opportunity, an event to teach developers how to test. So spent a half a day on this, and I went from group to group to group, and they found incredible bugs, fantastic exploratory testing. They found functional bugs, they found security bugs, they found the bugs I would expect a skilled test team to find. They just needed a little bit of training, some motivation, and some support, and they did fantastic. And again, and then the last thing why I don't like traditional testing is these siloed teams. don't like I like the idea of the team delivering quality. I feel that's the only way we can do it with quality and efficiency. And if it bounces back and forth between these silos of perceived specialization, I don't think it's a great way to make software. So that's my stance. Hopefully I haven't pissed too many people off, but it's important before I talk about these modern testing principles, which are really, remember, they're not that modern and they're not about testing. They're really just good engineering principles that I and my team of testers drive across our organizations at Unity. So that's probably the longest intro ever to actually get into modern testing, and we'll spend the rest of this talk there. So this is a guy I call Monty the modern tester. I can tell you're all very impressed by my art skills, but that's the best I can do. So Monty, as I mentioned, the modern tester focuses on speeding up the team. They're focused on learning, and these are things you look at as a tester and you go, yeah, I do all those things anyway. Testing quality coaching is very important, and again, I use Lisa directly and indirectly as a sounding board on a lot of this, and Lisa is very much a support. Lisa Crispin, the author of Agile Testing, or one of the authors. A couple of the things she's grabbed onto in our discussions around this is the tester as a quality coach, and she's pushing that more, as well as leveraging customer data extensively. They're an equal member of the feature team. I'll dive into that a little bit later. Not a separate member that does all the testing. They're just a specialist on the team. And they do some testing. Nobody on my team does the majority of the testing for their feature team. They do from a reasonable amount to very little testing, but they're involved in quality every day. My team is focused on quality and the quality culture, making sure the right tests are happening, doing some more of the complex and larger and end-to-end type tests, but most of the rest of the testing is done by the development team with the help and coaching from the people on my team. And that's a lot of the way I see this modern testing work. There's this word from Agile, specializing generalists or generalizing specialists. I want people that know a little about a lot or a lot about a little, and aren't afraid to learn new things so they can continue to spread their skills. Natalie, I will answer your question in a later slide. I don't exactly mean that, but I may mean that. So I'll put that into context in a while. So about a year ago, no, longer than that, maybe a year and a half ago, I had just read Principles by Ray Dalio, a book about what principles are. And it's a way to live your values and figure out what those things are. And I realized that I wanted modern testing to have principles. Like, what are our guiding forces? What guides our actions in this world of modern testing that Brett and I have been talking about? Again, which is just, how do we, from a quality perspective, drive good engineering? Or how do we drive good engineering from a quality perspective? So I sketched out these principles, and I do everything in the Agile way. So I shipped something that was close, but I knew was wrong, because I don't get feedback from my effort till it's in the hands of customers. So I shared with about 100 of our listeners of the podcast, and we vetted and argued and discussed and changed and iterated. And then about a year ago, for 6 months we did that. Then maybe a year ago, we knew we weren't done. Well, we thought we weren't done, but we thought they were good enough to publish. And we haven't changed them since then. And there's been, and there will be today, controversy. And I'm happy to discuss those points that are controversial, because some points do indeed make people uncomfortable, or can make testers uncomfortable. But I think that's good. There's a leadership quote from a guy named Ron Heffetz in a book called Leadership on the Line. It says that leadership is disappointing people at a level they can absorb. And I like the idea, and I hope to not disappoint you too much, but if I do, at a level you could absorb. So with that, I want to dive into the modern testing principles and a little bit for each of them what they mean. So the first priority is that our priority is improving the business. The first principle is that our priority is improving the business. And what I mean by this is that in the old days, I mean, there's even a book called maybe I'm paraphrasing, Reducing the Cost of Software Testing. Traditionally, we've thought about software testing as a cost. It's a tax that we pay. I think actually software testing or helping the team do testing as part of development instead of testing that's done separately from development is a value add for the business. I think it enables higher quality and a more efficient pace, which means more value for the business. I truly believe that. And we focus on not on finding bugs, not on proving functional correctness. We focus on improving the business. How can we make the business of what we're building better? It doesn't mean we need business degrees, but it means we need to think about the customer and what we're building and how we provide value to them. So our priority is there and not on some of the things that we focused on earlier in our careers. That allows me and people on my team to focus on again, to do that exact challenge I was talking about. I didn't know how well the pre-questions would set up the principles, but I want people to focus on diving in, looking at the whole system, figure out where to improve, and diving in again, not just on finding bugs. My first team at Microsoft, I had a bug quota. It was the most abused metric on the entire team. Hopefully none of you have those today, and those are lost. Principle 2 is we accelerate the team, and we use models like lean thinking and theory of constraints to identify, prioritize. You can read the slide, and to get rid of bottlenecks and make the system faster. So lean thinking is about reducing waste, and theory of constraints is about finding bottlenecks. Theory of constraints is described very well in a book called The Goal, but that's about manufacturing. But there's a book called The Phoenix Project by Jez Humble and a few others, which describes theory of constraints in an IT software team. It's not about getting rid of, completely eliminating anything slowing you down. It's about mitigating it until it's not a bottleneck anymore. So as I mentioned, the way to accelerate the team, we're going to eliminate bottlenecks and inefficiencies, looking for things that are causing delays, maybe a sign-off. Let me give you an example of this from my team as part of my adventures. One of my teams that delivers our developer dashboard at Unity had a process where the developers would do the work, and then just to get they would do all their testing or a lot of their testing, but they were in the habit of then giving that pull request to the test person on my team to verify before they checked in. As you can imagine, that ended up being a bottleneck, and this person ended up spending a lot of their time every day double checking these things that didn't really have any problems, and they were well tested already. So what the team developed together during one of their retrospectives is a policy that things can be tagged as, I forget the exact name, I think it's QA verify needed or QA bypass. Meaning, based on some heuristics, like there's no UI here and it's small and I've done a crap load of testing myself, I don't need QA to look at this. And the developers, despite the fact that you may think they're going to abuse that and screw that up, have done a very, very good job at that. And different developers, depending on their testing skills, may have different internal heuristics they use. But for the most part, in fact, I can't even think of any places where it hasn't worked off the top of my head, this has allowed developers to bypass the test specialist on my team and check in the majority of their check-ins without his need. And when they do need him, they end up pair testing a lot and testing things together, which helps both of them learn more about the product and more about testing, and probably changes the heuristic they need to check in that use that QA bypass tag for their check-in. So looking for things like that that help get rid of bottlenecks and help learning on the team is a pretty optimal way, I think, to improve the testing in the testing business. You will see that the principles do overlap quite a bit. Uh, we prefer, this is, as you can tell, inspired by the Agile Manifesto a little bit, but we prefer pairing over handoff. We want to work together versus like throwing code over a wall. Having team goals, working on things at the same time, sorry, working on things serially rather than at the same time, so we can get things all the way to done before we work on the next thing. We find that's a more efficient way to make software. That's what Kanban's all about. And by focusing on getting the tools and infrastructure in place that we need, we're able to run with a pretty lean QA team. I don't know our ratios. It's 1 to, if I were to count, some of my teams actually don't have any testers anymore. I can go into that a little bit more later. But for the most part, maybe if you care about the ratio, it's somewhere between 1 to 7 and 1 to 10. We run pretty lean and it works out pretty well because we've invested as a team in tooling and infrastructure. I already told my story about pairing coaching and teaching. I snuck it in there, so I'm going to go on. So our third principle is it's about continuous improvement and getting rid of the safety net. We want to help teams continually improve. So one of the things we do is we drive retrospectives. I think it's the most important meeting any team can have, no matter what flavor of Agile you're using. We are not the last line of defense. We are an early line of defense to work with you and coach with you and get you thinking about things early on that maybe you wouldn't have thought of before. And as I mentioned before, we believe a safety net is a bottleneck, so we don't want to have that. We want to help the team constantly learn. That's a big goal of ours. The fourth principle is about quality culture. We do a lot of coaching and leading of our team, not just in testing, but around all the attributes that make up a quality culture. Probably most of you, if not all of you, have at least heard from one person in your career that that testing is responsible for quality. And you shook your head and you said, nope, nope, no. And I also agree, testing is not responsible for quality. Quality is a team-owned thing. However, I do hold my team accountable and responsible for nurturing and growing the quality culture of their team. The team should get a better quality approach to software. So, of course, quality culture is a very, describe culture to me is very difficult. But what you can do is, for your context, figure out what attributes you think are important for a quality culture. But to do that, it's going to require some leadership. One of the things I do with everyone on my team, and these days almost none of them are managers, is help them become better leaders. They need to lead the team towards a quality culture and to help out with, to be able to take on different personalities. I know you've all dealt with people that don't want to do things differently. They don't want to try new things, but there are techniques and tools you can use to help do better there. So on my team, as an example, some of the things we work on is in improving the quality culture is quality ownership. That's making sure that there is truly a shared owning of quality and testing activities. It's not all done by one person. To make sure that the team understands the breadth of testing. Some teams think that, and I've heard this so many times that it makes me sad, where teams have written unit tests that all passed and they have 100% code coverage. So they say we don't have any quality issues, or we can't have any quality issues. But there's a lot more to customer quality than there is functional correctness. I also expect teams to not build up a backlog of debt and maintenance issues. I am very, very close to having all my teams at Unity working from a 0-bug backlog. That's been a goal of mine since very early when I started. We should hit that. The goal was by the end of the calendar year, and one team they're a little slow. They have 12 bugs left, but I think we can get them under control. If any of you work from a 0-bug backlog, it is such a freeing experience for the development team. They don't have that debt lurking over them. It's kind of like paying off your credit card bills. If you don't have any debt, you don't feel bad about spending money elsewhere if you know you can continue to pay that bill. Maybe the metaphor breaks down there. We do look at code quality and tools, but we look at putting a lot of those into our check-in gates. But looking to expand static analysis tools, linters, code coverage tools, whatever we can find to help with that code correctness. We don't have to find those bugs later. The overall development approach, again, as you can tell, I'm a fan of Agile. So I do expect the teams to have a development approach where work items are small, and I don't care as much about estimates as I care about breaking things down into items that, I mean, the smaller unit of time you break down a work item into, the less chance it has, in my experience, of ballooning into something huge. Having a good definition of done on every item is very good. As I mentioned earlier, how are we using data? Are we not using it all? Do we care if it's there? Do we use it to just prove, to back ourselves up when we agree with it and ignore it when it's wrong? I call that data affirmed. Or are we actually using it to become data-driven and data-centric, doing things like experimentation, etc.? And then leadership support, which is, does our leadership team, how involved is our leadership team in quality? Do they give a team a rallying cry to work around? Do they emphasize quality, and do they celebrate when the team hits quality goals? Or do they just stay out of the way, or do they try and micromanage all of it? I think the best leadership you can do is when you give a team a framework they can work in and then get out of their way. But I do expect the modern testers, or the testers on my team, are people leading a team towards these principles, which could be developers or even project managers, to take these sorts of things into account. And in your context, there may be a different list, maybe a partial list, maybe a whole different list. And then we get to the first one, like head nods, head nods, head nods. The first one that maybe is controversial for some people. And I didn't think this when we wrote it, but it's worth talking about. We believe that the customer is the only one capable to judge and evaluate the quality of a product. This goes back to the Eric Ries line. Your engineering effort is useless until it's in the hand of customers. However, in the history of testing, we have put ourselves in a position of saying, we are the customer, we act like the customer. And I'm telling you today, you are not the customer. You can use personas and try and estimate the customer, but only the customer truly understands whether what you're giving them is value or not. This doesn't mean that you give crap code to customers or make the customers do all your testing, but it does mean you have to understand what the customers want, what the customers need versus what they want, and have data in place that helps you, or it could be surveys at first, or data and instrumentation in the code that lets you figure out if you're delivering something they use and if they are successful with it. On most of my teams, I should say many of my teams, not all, sorry, I retracted my question because I wanted to answer it, but I'm going to go back to it. We want to, if I lost my train of thought, it'll come back in a minute. Want to give customers what they want, what they need versus what they want, and we want to be able to understand, I guess I'll repeat myself, we want to understand if we're delivering something that gives them value. And let's talk about a culture of experimentation where we deliver, when we deliver a new feature, we want to ask ourselves, what is the business value of this? And then we try and figure out how to measure that from customer instrumentation. And we can look at that as metrics to figure out if what we delivered is actually doing what we thought we would. Very similar to A/B testing, we just do it on new features as well, using experimentation. So that one, as I mentioned, scares people a little bit, and I've had a reasonable amount of pushback on this one, but I don't believe I want to change it. I think it's the right thing. The customer is who we make our software for. We don't make it for ourselves. And again, I'm not saying they do all the testing. I'm saying we have to, if it's not solving their business problem, we made the wrong thing. Tom Poppendijk once said, customers don't want software. They want their problem solved. We should focus on solving customer problems. Six hinted at a lot. Or don't worry, there's only 7 of these. We use data extensively, deeply understand customer usage, close the gap between product hypothesis and business impact. This just means that we want to use collected customer data to understand not personal information, not freaky, odd information. We want to understand how to build a better product. Often, there's a chapter in the lean startup called Pivot or Persevere, and very often you start building something, and then you realize you need to build something else because the customers are using it in a different way than you had planned. If you don't have the data to discover that, to understand how it's being used and know if it's being used as you thought it would or differently, you can never make that choice and have it turn into something huge. Tons of examples of this from software, but we have to understand what we're building, and we use data to do that. You can even do that. We did that on Xbox, which was again a big fat download that shipped to our beta users once a week. But we used data to figure out how they were using it, like things on tweak. I worked on Xbox One, the original, and we would understand things like how to configure the dashboard, what to do around game launch and when to put games in the background and what to do there and how much CPU to give games when they're in the background. We could use data to help figure those things out. I mentioned already shipping is a hypothesis, meaning we want to ship things to learn, and if we don't have the data, we can't learn. I see teams do something I call forum-driven development a lot of times, where they ship software, then they go to Reddit or their forums or the internet to look for, or just set up custom web searches to see what customers say about their product, and that's how they react. That's not efficient. It's interesting, but it's just inefficient, and you only get the loud customers. Collecting data is about how your software is being used, and architecting in a way where you can use data to understand how it's being used is the only way you're truly going to understand. And just be ready to learn quickly and adapt. One of the things that I've used a lot on different teams, both at Microsoft and at Unity, to quickly get started in data is, I've hinted at this before, ask what business success looks like. What does it look like if this feature is successful? Add the logging or instrumentation needed to help answer the question. And then look at the data, see if it answered the question. If it did, great. Ask if you have more questions. If it didn't, ask why not. See what else you need to measure or change to try and figure it out. It's very quick and easy. I'm hoping, and I don't know your backgrounds, but hopefully most of you are using data and can continue to refine that, because I think it's super, super important. It's one of the most important principles in modern testing. And then finally, the 7th one, is the definitely controversial one, which actually goes to Natalie's first question, is we focus on testing abilities, know-how across the team. Understanding that this may reduce or in some cases eliminate the need for a dedicated testing specialist. Don't freak out. I'm not saying any of your jobs go away. I can say, and before I go on, I'll say what this does mean is that while Principle 4 was a lot about the quality culture and about quality, this one's specifically about testing. This is about doing coaching and helping the team understand better ways to do testing, understand what testing is. I believe that testing is part of software development and not something done to a developed product. And I think a lot of people lose sight of that. So software testing isn't a dark art. There isn't some special skill we were born with that only allows us to do it. It's a trainable thing. I've learned this with now several hundred developers, which I think is a large enough sample set for me to believe this is true. Some are not as good as our best testers. Some are better than some of the best testers I've worked with. I'm sure we've seen testers the same way. And then to go back, focus on the first half of this principle. Don't worry about if the second half scares you, just ignore it. Work on expanding testing abilities and know-how across the team. Work on that. If it gets to a point, the goal isn't to do, I'm sorry to go back and forth all the time. The goal isn't to eliminate the testing specialist. The goal is to expand testing know-how across the team. If you do that, you may get to a point where you realize you don't need someone dedicated to just do testing on the team. You may. So I think a lot of people look at this one and freak out over job security, but really, I don't think anyone can argue with the fact that spreading testing know-how across the team is a good thing. And what I'm saying is, and I've seen this happen enough where I want to write it down in a principle, is that if you do this, in some cases, you no longer need that test specialist on the team. One of the things I've done at Unity is reduce the size of my team. And I mentioned that a big chunk of my org now does not have software testers. They have testing specialists, people who are better at testing, people who do more quality activities to help that team achieve their quality goals. And this is our biggest business at Unity, our ads platform. It ends up being more efficient for them to ship without having a dedicated test team and that back and forth that happens there. So let me talk a little bit about how that works. So here's your typical agile team. You have a bunch of software engineers and you have your specializing test specialist. But remember what I said before, is that the modern testing is a specializing generalist, meaning they're good at testing, but they can probably do some other things as well. But that's true with a lot of aspects of development. I say test specialist because you may have a perf specialist or a front-end specialist or a UI specialist or a database specialist. I think a software team filled with just developers, where someone may have a specialty in testing, is a more efficient way to, one, for the team to do better. I believe software is a team activity, not an individual activity, and I believe a team made up of generalizing specialists like this, and I believe I've seen these teams make better software more efficiently. I mentioned when I first started at Unity, I had a team of about 50 people. I took my ads team, which was the largest team, and over time, eventually moved them to be all developers with some test specialties, but most of them doing mostly development work. But what I did is I split the what I call the dotted and solid lines in the matrix organization. So there was me, and this is the way most of my org still works that I have left. I manage these testers directly that work across a variety of feature teams. They all work for me, but they kind of also work for the feature lead of the team. I flipped that, so now those testers now work, in many cases, not every case yet, work for the feature lead, but I still have one-on-ones and talk to them. Nothing changed except for the solid lines and the dashed lines. But this is a step towards creating that team. That's the first step towards creating this team. If you want to read these more or comment, they're on moderntesting.org. I'm going to leave them right there for a minute. I want to go ahead. I think I asked Natalie's first question, which is, do you mean that testers aren't very necessary? I believe testing is absolutely essential, and good testing is critical to having a strong software business. I should put this carefully, I don't believe that you need a dedicated tester in order to do good testing. But I don't think also you can stop and say, okay, everybody now does testing and we don't need testers anymore. That doesn't work because the team needs the coaching that the current testers like us have today. I think a team grows into that role. Even in ads, where I have a very, very large org with no dedicated testers, 2 of the developers on that team who report to the VP of ads, but they dotted line report to me. They focus entirely on quality, but they look at quality across 2 people and 2 sites, about a half a dozen feature teams each, helping those teams improve their quality culture. And then for your second question around bugs that will not be fixed, you can actually search the internet for articles on Zero Bug Backlog for more info on this, because the process I follow isn't any different that's been written about by other people. But we look at bugs and we decide we're going to fix them now or not, or we're not going to fix them. And in some cases, when we decide not to fix a bug, we may add some extra logging to help understand more on why it happened. But we don't keep bugs around because we may fix them someday. it's a disservice to our customers, because if our customers report a bug and we say, okay, thank you, we'll work on this, and we don't work on it for 6 months or a year or 2 years, that's, in my opinion, rude to the customer. I'd rather reply right away and say, this doesn't meet our bar right now for fixing. Thanks for reporting. We may fix this at a later day, and we mark it as not fixed. And that's, once you get over that hump, things work out pretty smoothly. So you decide either as bugs come in, you fix them now, or you don't fix them. And it's a business decision. And we look at it, we prioritize that bug in our backlog. And if it's not going to end up in the bugs that are going to be addressed in the next week or two, just goes to won't fix. So that's how we take care of that. So the feature is already here. William Gibson quote, this is happening. I don't know if it's happened today, but every time I've given a talk around this subject, they've all been different. I see a surprising amount of head nods and people saying, yeah, we're already kind of doing this. Thanks for putting words to what I'm saying. So for any of you thinking, this is crazy, who let the crazy man come talk to me on my Thursday night? This stuff is happening. And it may happen to you sooner or later, or it may take forever until this is a status quo way of making software. And people have asked me, why call it modern testing? Will you have post-modern testing? And I don't know. But I think if there comes a point where this becomes obsolete, like my book I wrote at Microsoft, which is kind of obsolete, if it becomes obsolete, I will recognize it as such and move on and do something else. But in the meantime, I think that, in my opinion, this is the best way to make. These principles will help guide you towards making quality software in 2018 and beyond. So Monty says, thank you. And I can take as much time as our hosts will allow. I'll put up my vanity slide there so you can find from left to right, my blog site, my podcast, and my free ebook on automation. But I'll just do questions, and I'll dive right in from Alexander on modern testing requiring more technical knowledge test specialists in order to find potential problems. Potentially, it depends what you mean by technical. Technical by definition means using the tools of the craft. So it doesn't necessarily mean writing code or scripts, but it may mean knowing how to write a SQL query to look at data. It may mean knowing how to configure some JSON for and hook up a module in Jenkins or another CI tool. So those things, I think those will be more and more required. I think, however, I do see even a role that could pop up for the really good manual exploratory tester in test coaching. Elizabeth Hendrickson's book called Explore It has tons of stories about, and she's mostly a developer who's been in test for a little bit, but tons of stories in there about teaching developers how to test and how to do exploratory testing. So using that book as a model, there's a ton of upside in modern testing for a air quote manual tester, someone who does exploratory testing or testing without tools for the bulk of their testing, to have a huge influence on their team. So hopefully that answered that. Can the principles be applied everywhere in software development, including all the things we bring up that are traditionally waterfall because people may die? Things like medicine, NASA, military, etc. Yes, I think so. Those things aren't shipping all the time. Services are great because if you make a small mess up, you can fix it in 5 minutes. If someone can die in 5 minutes, you have a little less. There's a little bit more risk there. However, if you're building something for NASA, and if you get out of the hardware manufacturing part, we're trying to figure out if the O-rings are of the right material to handle the temperature on a cold Florida morning. You don't want to hurry up and ship that, but you can accelerate the team's ability of shippable quality by using software to build models around those things. I think modern testing principles apply, and they help you identify where risk is in the system. And then also bringing in the agile principles, I think, in medicine, in NASA, in the military, getting feedback from your customers. If you're building software that's going to be used on the battlefield, getting feedback from the generals who are going to be using that, or whoever's going to be running that, on how it's going to be used and understand how things are going to work, yeah, those things are pretty valuable. I think your goal is still to provide business value. And if the business value is keeping people alive, I think it definitely apply. What else do we have? I think we are recording is the answer to that question.
I will connect. So yeah, I will say from my side that very big thank you. It's very interesting. I have a question.
Yes.
You will look to, like, in 10 or 15 years or 20 years, do you think that we won't have like QA engineers, right?
Yeah.
Or no? It's a popular question.
Predicting things is hard, especially about the future. Is how I'll lead that off. I think we still will. We'll have what I call testing specialists. What title we give them, I don't know. I think you will always need some experts in testing.
Like the knowledge keepers.
You will need people who can consult and coach and help teams. Because even if, let's say I got a team today that like got to a stage where like even my ads team has no testers, but I have 2 very deep, knowledgeable test specialists working with them. Let's say over the next couple years, they got to the stage where the quality culture of the team was so high that they didn't need, it was all inherent in everyone. They didn't need to do anything. So they just started working on development tasks full time. Something tells me there's some law of perpetual motion here that tells me that over time, some of that culture will be lost. Whether it's a new hire who doesn't know that culture, or whether it's just some things forgotten or some laziness, at some point, someone will need to step back up again, need to step out of their development role and work on some quality things to help the team get their level up. So I think we will always need quality specialists, quality testing specialists. I think in 20 years, we will have very few people. Things move so slowly. Yeah, I'll say a relatively small number of people, especially compared to today, who do testing and quality full time. They'll just do other things as well.
Okay, I got it. Thank you for answer. Okay, everybody who's here, if you have any question, you can answer.
I can handle, I think, one at least from the Q&A tab, which is what to do when programmers hate tests. My both short and final answer may be just to hire a different programmer. Not always the easiest thing. Of course, in our position, we can't always influence the firing and hiring of people. But these days, and obviously you wouldn't bring it up if it wasn't different where you are, but I don't know of any company, any place that I've worked or any of my colleagues worked where there isn't an expectation that developers write some level of tests. And through our retrospectives and looking where the bottlenecks are, like I mentioned earlier, we've been able to get developers to write most, or in some cases, all of the tests. So I'm not sure. I guess it goes back to that principle 4 on the quality culture. You need to lead them towards things, and you could show them about the inefficiency. You could, they hate write tests, so you write a unit test for them. It finds a bug. It goes back and forth and back and forth. You can have a conversation about how, hey, it is really wasting a lot of time for us to go back and forth on all this. What can we do differently? Or another thing I've done is maybe you start by writing a very minimal set of unit tests for the developer and say, here, just run these to check in. And if something fails, let me know. We can pair test it together and figure out what's going on. And they'll do that once. Maybe the next time they go, I don't want to bug you. I'll figure it out myself. Okay, I fixed my test. And you just find small baby step ways to get them to understand the value of tests. A good suite of unit tests, and me being I would say I'm at least an intermediate developer, even having written code for at least a half a dozen shipping Microsoft products. I am super scared of checking in buggy code. So I write a lot of tests for my stuff because I don't have a lot of confidence in my code. So my safety net doesn't come from a test team. My safety net in writing code comes from writing a great suite of unit tests. So it's hard if someone just doesn't believe that or they're overconfident in their work, but I think through baby steps, you can help them do that.
Okay. So I think we can finish our webinar. No more questions from.
There's one more if I have time to shove it in.
Just a second.
Or two. I'll answer them quickly. Then you can get rid of me. So it's about how to set and develop the quality culture of the team. I don't know of any books, although I've been thinking hard about writing one. But the part about how to convince business to spend additional time on testing activities and potentially delay the release. What I've found is this is going to sound like a cliche, but if you slow down, you speed up. Meaning that if you take the time to build the quality in from the beginning versus try and test it in at the end, you actually end up shipping faster. And I've seen that happen multiple times. So that's my short answer there. And you can, we can definitely follow up later, but that's, so you have to do small examples. Just again, everything about building a quality culture is baby steps, not large steps. And then one question on, do you write automated tests for new proof of concept features? Personally, me, most of the time, but not all the time. But there's a difference between a proof of concept and something you're going to ship. Once it's something I'm going to ship to customers, in fact, even if I have a prototype I want to ship to customers and get some feedback on, I don't have tests. I have monitoring and data, though, that I use as testing to understand how it's being used and what errors they're seeing. And then lastly, Windows mistakes. They have a lot of developers that have been developing for a long time and think they know better. And it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. And on top of that, it's a super complex code base. Even I have a bunch of code floating around in Windows that I don't even know what it does anymore. So anyway, I think I've blasted through the end of those. So now you can kick me off if you want.
Okay. As I see, they want to buy something. One more question from Igor.
Oh, my plan is to not go to a store because I don't like crowds, but I will check out Amazon to see what deals they have. I may buy a large monitor for the downstairs computer at our house.
Okay, perfect.
If something is reasonably on sale.
Okay, so Alan, thank you for your speech. It was very interesting for me, and I think interesting for all people who are here. And I will send. Do you allow to share your the recording of the webinar to people?
Yep, you can share away, and if anybody wrote it down way back, I can't get there. On the first slide is a link to the slides. You can look at them, use them, whatever you want to do with them. Sorry, all the slides are almost there. There. And just more adventures, modern testing UTOR. So.
Okay.
You can share that link as well. You can do whatever you want with the slides.
Yeah, I will send everybody email with the links to your podcast and to the blog and to this presentation and to recording. So a lot of things. So thank you.
You're very welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right. I'll see you, everybody. Thank you.
Все, ребята, рад был провести вам вебинар. Я думаю, тут все говорят на русском языке, на украинском, неважно. Как вам вебинар вообще? Понравился? Плюсики, плюсики, давайте, я люблю плюсики. Хотите, чтобы еще проводили такие вебинары? У меня есть идея проводить вебинары ну, с такими популярными ребятами из тестирования. И есть, скажем так, скилл договариваться с ними, чтобы они выходили на такие вебинары. Хотя на сегодня я надеялся, что будет чуть побольше людей. Нас сегодня 30 человек было, хотя регистрации под 200, там 190 с копейками было. Вот. Ну окей, хорошо, все, ребят. Спасибо, что пришли, послушали. Всем скину. Запись я вроде бы сделал, должна быть. Так что все замечательно с записью будет. Все, ребят, пока-пока. Так, а где здесь выйти?